We are continuing in our series that we've been in. We've been looking at some older beliefs in our world, specifically some beliefs that were around during the first and second centuries in the Near East. That's the area where really the Bible was written and different things. Things that the early church would have dealt with, okay? Beliefs that they would have dealt with. Areas that early followers of Jesus had to figure out, like, how do I live within this world and within this belief set while being a follower of Jesus? And we're looking at those early beliefs, but we're looking at how they still are kind of showing up today. All right, like we often think that today life is so much harder. There's all these different things, but at the same time, we're so much smarter. We've like figured everything out. We're so much more developed than earlier societies. And so we don't deal with all that stuff that they dealt with. You know, we've gone through the Enlightenment period. We're so smart. When in reality, when you actually begin to look at some of those things from that time, we're dealing with a lot of the same things. All right, like the author of Ecclesiastes puts it this way. He says, there's nothing new under the sun. History just repeats itself. It's all been done before. So yeah, you may have a new name or a new approach or a new way you talk about it, but so many things are the same. And so we've looked at how our culture, and primarily this has been all surrounding like sexuality and different things like that. So far in this series, we've looked at how our culture approaches sex. That everything is like, sex sells, it's used for marketing, all these different things. It's just so prevalent in our world. And so we kind of looked at that the very first week and how really what that lines up with, we just call it like being, we've had the sexual revolution and we're just so much more advanced. 2,000 years ago, they would have just called that Aphrodite worship. Worshiping the goddess of erotic love and these different things. And so we're like, this hasn't really changed. And then last week we talked about, okay, well, if that's how our world is, how do we have a healthy approach to sexual relationships? And so we had a conversation last week where we kind of went with the nitty-gritty and had some blush-inducing like moments where we just dove in and we're like, what does a healthy sexual relationship within a marriage look like? All right, and I don't think that's talked about enough. We have an entire book of the Bible, Song of Songs. We kind of went there towards the end of it. And we're like, what does this look like? And so that's where we were last week. And actually, this series has come out of, before Easter, we did a time where we took about 3 months and we answered questions that people in our church had written in. And so we got a lot of questions surrounding sexuality. We had one message where we talked about same-sex relationships. And that was kind of the only place we went in that one. And I said, this is just not enough. And this isn't a healthy way to approach this. We need to talk about sexual relationships like completely, not just in like a narrow scope. All right. And so we talked about that about a month and a half ago. And so if you want to hear any of those, you can go back, find them on our website. All right. It was, first off, it was called, what did we call that? A biblical response to. And so it would have been a biblical response to sexuality. And then the last couple weeks in this series. But today, I'm not going to rehash any of those conversations. Today, we are going into another difficult topic, potentially one of the most heated and charged conversations happening within our world today, especially within the political realm. We are going to talk about gender identity. All right? And so, like always, I'm going to ask for some extra grace as we do this topic. I'm not an expert in any of these areas at all, but I have the responsibility to bring us to God's word, to help show where it connects with our lives and with our world. And so what I want to try and do this morning as we walk through this is I want to do a little bit up front of kind of catching us up to speed and getting all of us on the same page as far as how the world is approaching this right now. So I may make some statements, and I'm not meaning them to be like big like truth statements. I'm just talking about this is what is kind of seen as basic truth today within our world. All right? And so just kind of understand that. And then we're going to talk about the ancient belief that I think kind of maps onto this a little bit. And then we're going to look at the Bible. And then we're going to say, how do we apply this to our life? That is a lot to do in a short amount of time on Mother's Day. I'm sorry, mothers, if you're like, I'm looking forward to this like great, uplifting, mother-loving message. Yeah, sorry, we're in a series and we're not stopping. So that's where we're going today. All right, and so let's do this. If you're willing, if you're able, would you stand with me? I'd love to open us in prayer. That's always a good direction to go. I'm going to pray just not only over our message, but over the mothers in the room as well, and just all of us. So, God, we are just so thankful. Lord, for this community, God, that we can come together, we can celebrate things like Mother's Day. God, we just pray for all the moms in the room. God, I pray that today would be a special day, that they would feel that specialness. God, we pray for those that today is difficult. God, we just pray that, Lord, that your healing, that your peace, that your comfort would come alongside of us as well, and that we could feel that in these moments. God, we pray a special just blessing on all the moms in the room. God, we also lift up just this conversation that we're going to have together. Lord, we pray that we would be able to grow closer to you. We'd see your word. We'd see your truth in the midst of all of this. Jesus, we ask this in your name. Amen. All right, you guys can be seated. You know, my goal is never to offend or to hurt anybody. And some topics can be really difficult to walk through. But like we've said in this one, we are not going to shy away from like hard conversations that we think people need to be having. I think for the most part, people are having these conversations outside the church all the time. And so if we are followers of Jesus, we should say, okay, well, what does this look like from the biblical standpoint? Because I know what Facebook has to say. I know what all my coworkers, all my friends have to say. What does the Bible have to say in some of these things? So we aren't going to shy away from that. I feel the need today, because this is a huge topic with a lot of things, to be moving quickly. And I'll just be honest, moving fast and being tactful are very difficult to do together. And so again, this is why I'm asking for grace. And so I want to kind of go through this, but we're going to have to move faster than I want to, and we're going to have to not cover some things that we probably should, even as we break this down further. And so the concept of transgender or gender identity has gone by many different names throughout the centuries and the years. It's not necessarily completely new, but in the more recent history of our country, we can see some specific dates where things became a little bit more prevalent within our lives. All right, and so one date that I found interesting, because it actually impacts us as kind of Minnesotans in a way, is in 1975, the city of Minneapolis became the very first city in the United States to pass trans-inclusive civil rights protection legislation. All right, so Minneapolis actually was the very first city in America to do this. All right, so then fast forward 5 years. In 1980, there's a book that is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. All right, that's a mouthful. So anybody who works within the mental health field, whether they're therapists, whatever that looks like, they know it as the DSM, and they kind of joke as like, this is their Bible. This is how you basically diagnose people. It has all the different like things written in there. All right, so in 1980, they were on their third edition of the DSM, and in that one, the term was first introduced that was transsexualism. All right, that term stuck around for a little bit, but it was later changed to gender identity disorder. All right, and in 2013, the term was changed again to gender dysphoria. Now, that's the main term that within the medical world that you're going to hear today, gender dysphoria. All right, now, you might be sitting there being like, okay, what is that? Like, what is dysphoria? Okay, well, a word that more of us are probably familiar with is euphoria. All right, and euphoria is like a positive state that you are in. All right, positive feelings, things are good, like that's euphoric. All right, dysphoria is a negative state. So a very basic understanding, all right, this is again kind of using world's definitions of things. All right, you have sex and you have gender. Someone's sex would be their physical markers, and that sex is often seen as biological. All right, someone's gender is seen as cultural. So you have kind of biological, cultural. All right, so this is why that matters. Gender dysphoria is when someone feels that their sex and their genders are not in alignment, okay? And that causes them distress. Now, within that, there can be all different kind of ranges. It's a spectrum where someone could be feeling mildly distressed, moderately, severely. It can ebb and flow in seasons, okay, different things. And so this is kind of the definition of gender dysphoria. And from the world, they would say that this can be, just all sorts of different ranges. Now, one of the articles that I was reading was also trying to explain, not just the difference between sex and gender, but trying to explain the difference of sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, none of these articles that I'm referencing right now were like from a Christian standpoint, all right? And they phrased it this way, the difference between orientation and identity. They said sexual orientation determines who you want to go to bed with, and gender identity determines who you want to go to bed as. All right, that quote right there, I kind of saw all over. I tried to, anytime there's a quote, I like to be like, where did that quote come from? I actually don't know because it's cited in all these different kind of like just more loose articles that people are writing, not necessarily scholarly ones, and everyone's kind of citing different people. But the reason why I bring that up is you can even hear in that definition there, and think about this as a whole, so much of people's identity in our world today is made up off of who they feel they are sexually attracted to. That's a huge part of someone's identity. And I bring that up because think back to a couple weeks ago. Like, I don't know if there is a more like vivid example of what we were referring as like Aphrodite worship, where there's just this idea of like, man, sex is on this pedestal. That so much of our world revolves around this, that a big part of someone's identity and who they feel they are is all based around who they are sexually attracted to. All right, back to kind of the history here. 2013, the DSM changes their terms. Now in 2013 and 2014, right about that time, there was a massive cultural shift that was happening. I don't know if everybody in this area of the country felt it. I don't think many of us feel like we felt it, but there was a shift that was happening, all right, compared to previous years in the amount of legislation and things like that were going on. In February of 2014, Facebook made news headlines when they changed the number of options that you had for selecting and labeling your gender by adding about another 50 genders to the drop-down menu. Some of you guys may remember this if you were on Facebook at that time. A lot of people were talking about it. A few months later, in May of 2014, Time magazine had a cover, like picture and article, and it was named the transgender tipping point. And essentially the heart of the article was that the transgender community felt that they had reached a critical mass spot in mainstream acceptance. All right, so they kind of called that the tipping point. There's just a lot more acceptance. Obviously, something like Time magazine is a magazine that's probably speaking more to and about the culture in a broad way, or maybe to more of like the bigger cities, coastal areas, urban centers, things like that. For those of us who are more inland, rural, small town, you might be like, man, I didn't feel like that was happening a whole lot in 2014. All right? And we just know this, like it takes a lot longer for things culturally to get to us. Okay, especially in the winter when it's frozen, like things just don't happen as fast. Some of you guys, you're just still rocking the same like fashion trends from the 70s. And you're like, it's okay, every 10 years I'm just back in trend again. I'm just gonna keep wearing my bell bottoms. It works. All right, like it's just, we know like things take longer to get here. So you may be hearing this and thinking, man, I didn't feel this in 2014, but that's understandable. Now here's the thing, for younger generations, it does not take as long for things to transfer. Okay, and really I would almost say for anybody nowadays because of phones, social media. Everybody is watching the same videos, part of the same thing, having the same influences. All right, so things just move a lot faster today. But I think for a lot of people, like if you weren't dealing with this in your life personally or in your family or in your close friends, you probably would have felt like some of this gender stuff really came out of nowhere and hit culture in our world fast and hard over the last decade. Things we never had to think about as kids, that I never had to think about as a child, questions that I never really asked myself, like, am I a boy or am I a girl? They're now very present in kids and teenagers' lives. Now, as a whole, it feels like culture is moving in this direction, but I want to say this. The Pew Research has just come out with some studies that are really interesting to read, that actually kind of paint a little bit of a different picture. Usually, in research, when they're asking kind of the whole country, they might ask a question this way and in the like positive way, and they'll get like 80% of people agree with this. And then they ask a similar question a different way and maybe in the negative, and it'll be like, well, only 20% of people agree with this. And that's kind of like inverse data. You know what I'm saying? When we look at this study, you would expect to see some inverse data that you just don't see. All right, 80% of U.S. adults think that there is at least some level of discrimination against transgender people. 80%, 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5. 64% are in favor of laws or policies that would protect transgender people against discrimination in jobs, housing, and public spaces. All right, so both of those, quite a bit over the majority. So you would expect if you ask kind of an opposing question that you would see the opposite, the inverse of this. At the same time, 60%, so still a majority of people, believe that people's gender is based on the sex that they were assigned at birth. That's still over the majority of people. That seems kind of almost contradictory when you first read that. Now, another interesting thing about that number being at 60% is this. That number has actually been increasing over the last 8 years. In 2017, it was 54%. In 2021, it was 56%. And in 2022, it was 60%. And in these research studies, they'll actually even break down ages, demographics, political affiliation, all those different things. It was really interesting to see some of this. Now, what this tells me is this. There's just a ton of tension. People don't know what to do in this conversation. Like as a whole, like your average person does not want another human to be discriminated against. They're like, no one should be feeling discriminated against. But they also are just unsure of like the entire conversation and topic. They're like, I don't really know what to do with this. And so people are asking questions. I've gotten questions of just like, how much of this is people dealing with this and actually walking through this, and how much of this is people or teenagers or kids being impacted by the culture around them. Okay, both those questions are being asked a lot, and I think they're being asked in like good faith even. Like someone's just like, I want to know. And maybe me phrasing those questions that way even sounds a little bit unfair or harsh. But those are the questions that are happening, and it's heated as people talk about this, especially the way I see it play out really difficultly is in two different ways within the public arena. The first one is when you start talking about public bathrooms. Okay, gender conversations around that get really, really heated. Okay, the other one is when people start talking about sports and when someone's competing in a gendered activity, but maybe they don't have the same biological sex as like the sport that they're competing in. People get really, really loud about those things. Think about last year when there was the female boxer. Okay, in I don't know if it's the Olympics last year, like all this was happening. I could not log on to either social media. Sometimes it's just like Facebook is the bad one. It's where all the angry people are. All right, and like I go to like Instagram because it's a little bit like friendlier. But like honestly, you couldn't log into any social media without like every other post. People were really up in arms one way or the other about this. Much of those conversations, they're happening within the arena, or at least people kind of put it within the arena of human rights. And so that gets very heated, very emotional, and understandably so. If you're talking about human rights, that's a big deal. Now, at the same time that things are ramping up in the United States, there's something else going on in Europe. Now, when we think about Europe, we tend to think of them as being a little bit more progressive than America. They tend to be a little bit ahead of us in different things. Even again, just go back to like fashion trends and things like that. Like you can see something in Europe and like 5 years later, you're like, okay, people are going to start wearing that in America, even though they shouldn't. That's a bad trend. Just like all these different things. Europe tends to be ahead of us. All right, so I want to look at something that was going on in Europe. In 1989, the NHS, that's the National Health Service of England, had commissioned a specialty clinic to provide care to transgender children. Okay, 1989. Fast forward 31 years. In 2020, the NHS noticed a large increase and the number of kids being referred from like a general practitioner, your regular doctor, to this specialty clinic focused on gender care. All right, here's a chart showing some of the referrals that were going on. There was a pretty big spike in between a few of these years here. Now, along with the increase in referrals, there was a shift in services. They shifted from a more psychosocial and psychotherapeutic model to more hormonal treatment. And in the years prior, leading to all of this, several staff members of this specialized clinic voiced concerns over the evidence base for the treatments being given and the extent of prior assessment happening before treatments. All right, essentially, like when you're going to do some type of treatment medically, there should be some evidence backing this up. That you can look back, you can look at studies, they should be a certain length amount of time, certain many people in them, all these different things. You should be able to look at these studies. Okay, this is like, I'm not going into this, but like this is why back in 2020 around COVID, things were so difficult and people were so heated about it because it was a new thing. There was no studies, there was nothing. People were trying to figure this out, but okay, so you kind of know what I'm saying. Like there's a certain amount of time you need. So in 2020, the NHS commissioned a review of the clinic and its practices based off of these referral numbers jumping. The person asked to head it up was named Hilary Cass. She was a retired consultant pediatrician and the former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. All right, this place dealt with gender services for children, young people, including transgender youth and those with gender dysphoria in England. All right, so if you're going to have someone who actually goes and looks at this and says, what is going on here? Is this right? Is this not? This is the type of bigwig that you want to bring in. She has the title, she has the experience, all those things. In January of 2021, all right, that review did not end until 2024. So while this review is going on, the Care Quality Commission in England gave the clinic an inadequate rating, which was the lowest rating that a clinic can get. Because of this, it ended up in the news. People were talking about this a lot. It became very heated around it. Eventually, that clinic closed. Now, they had another plan of trying to kind of open up some smaller, more localized ones, things like that, but that closed. Now, the final report that this person was asked to do, all right, it's called the Cass Review, based off of her name. The Cass Review came out last year in 2024, and it talked about the quality of studies that were being used to make decisions on how to treat kids. Okay, and the quality of those studies, like there's parameters around a study, right? The quality of those studies was not where it should be. The reality was there just wasn't the research that there should be. You can see it behind me here. You have what's a high quality study, and there was one study within that. Then you have moderate and low. All right? And so essentially what they're seeing here is, okay, we don't have the studies. We don't have the evidence, the things backing this up. We have not had enough time. We have not done the studies that need to happen to be making some of the major decisions that are being made. General practitioners, and I'm sure this doesn't speak for every single one of them, but some of them said that they felt under pressure to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach to children who were unsure of their gender. And so this was the massive increase in referrals over to this clinic. All right? And some of the things that weren't happening, they weren't looking into things called like co-occurring situations. Okay, like multiple things happen in our lives and in our bodies at once. Okay, I've said this before, like I'm type 1 diabetic. If I get the flu versus my wife who is not diabetic gets the flu, it is going to be worse for me. Like there are issues of things like co-occurring that are going to complicate that. The flu is going to look maybe a little differently in me than it does her. Okay, like when you have multiple things going on in your life, it's the same type of thing within the mental health world. Okay, if you're dealing with ADHD and depression and anxiety and schizophrenia, like all of those are playing off each other in different ways. And so this type of idea was not being looked at as well. Now, as this is happening, as the caste review is happening, as England is kind of taking a turn on some of this, the U.S. was ramping up hormone treatments and puberty blockers as a way to deal with some of the gender things. Many other countries were doing the opposite. Sweden, who was the first country, by the way, to legally allow somebody to change their gender, like to go into a courthouse and like change from your birth certificate. Sweden, the first country to do that, along with Finland, were limiting the use of puberty blockers and hormones, especially in minors, citing lack of evidence supporting their use. All right, this is crazy to me. Think about like Europe. Again, we kind of think of Europe as being a little bit like further ahead than we are in certain things. And this is what was happening there. Scandinavian countries that we tend to think of as pretty progressive, pumping the brakes in some of these areas. That's something we should pay attention to. Now, obviously, groups that would be pro-trans were quite upset by all of this in the report. All right, that was a whole lot of information. I say all of that to kind of help us get here. Even though a certain amount of gender things have been around for a while, there's a lot of this that is really, really new. Really new in our world. And our world is so quick at forging forward that we aren't always stopping and asking some of the big, incredibly important questions. How does this line up with an ancient belief? The ancient belief that I think comes into play here is called Gnosticism. It was a super early kind of belief, heresy, that kind of went against a lot of the teachings of Jesus and of the church and of the Bible. It's actually kind of hard to define Gnosticism because it's so many different things, it has so many different parts. But I'm going to give a little bit of a go at it here to kind of give us a little bit of an idea. Gnosticism was really about a lot of dualism, where you kind of had like two separate opposite things, all right? And so within Gnosticism, things that were spiritual were seen as good, and things that were physical or like material matter was all bad. It was like corrupted. Okay, so everything was good spiritual, bad physical. Now you can see how some of that could find its way into the early church when Paul is constantly talking about the struggle of flesh and spirit. Now Paul's not talking about flesh necessarily being bad. He's using that as like our desires and that type of thing. But Gnosticism really kind of grabbed a hold within Christianity in some of the early years because of this. All right, now Gnosticism, gnosis is Greek for knowledge. All right, it also was about like gaining this secret knowledge that would be key to unlocking what you need in life. The most basic idea of how this plays out for us is this. Like, Gnosticism would say that deep inside of me, deep inside of you, there is some truth, some spark, that if you can just figure that out, it will ultimately set you free. We just need to get in touch with whatever's kind of deep inside of us. We need to understand it. We need to find this inner truth. And that inner truth might even contradict with what is happening out here in the material world, but the material world is bad and the inner truth is good, so listen to that truth. Okay, that's Gnosticism. And it shows up everywhere in our world still today, and even in Christianity when we aren't careful. Okay, Plato, if you've heard that name, he was a Gnostic. All right, the idea of like us having a physical body, and then we die and the physical body's gone, and there's a spirit or a soul that floats off to heaven and spends eternity in this disembodied spiritual place. I hate to, like I've said this before, but if you're new here, I hate to break it to you, that's not Christian. The Bible actually never, ever points to that. That's a Gnostic idea. Plato had that idea. Okay, within the Bible, what it says is there's a physical resurrection, that we're going to have physical bodies again. There's going to be a new creation. And by the way, that sounds way more amazing than like floating in clouds and playing a harp inside of like a robe or something like that. All right, like, can you imagine some of you guys, you're like, I can go, and you can go fishing places you've never been able to go fishing, right? Like that, and that, like, it's just going to be amazing. New creation, like that's actually what the Bible teaches. So Gnosticism shows up still today. Okay, any of the dualism type ideas. Okay, some Christians have this like, here's my spiritual life, here's my every other day life. Here's Monday to Saturday, and then I go to church and I'm spiritual on Sunday. That divide, trying to pull those things apart, that's more Gnostic in nature. Right? Like those of us that love Jesus and are doing everything we can to follow him know that can't be separated out from any part of your life. Even the idea of like separation of church and state, I know we love that as Americans and these different things, or some people don't. Like, that's a little bit of a Gnostic idea at its whole. Now, like, there's parts of that maybe play out in a better way, but the reality is trying to separate things out is really, really difficult. Like, we know that our beliefs are just part of who we are. A big thing, the way that Gnosticism shows up today is this: conspiracy theories, right? Like, everybody loves a good conspiracy theory. Right? Like, you just want to hear, like, because think about this, okay? There's this secret knowledge that not everybody has. A whole bunch of the world's in the dark. And actually, this knowledge, like, it's going to set you free. It's going to tell you what's going on. All right? You know, they're not telling us everything. Okay, and I may even, like, agree with that a little bit, okay? Like, I'm under no impression that our government is completely open with us, okay? Like, I don't know. When I was a kid, we talked about Area 51 all the time, and they are just covering that up now. I haven't heard about Area 51 in years. Guys, we need to do better. Like, what's going on there? I'm kidding, okay. We love conspiracy theories because here's what it does. It takes a chaotic, broken world that we can't make sense of. How can this person be having that life? Well, this person has that life and all these things, and it makes sense of it. It gives you an answer, and it doesn't matter how far-fetched that answer is. Okay, like back in the day, there's a movie with Mel Gibson, Conspiracy Theory, and like it was just he had all these crazy ideas, but one of them ended up being true. And so then the government's after him. Like, it's this idea of like, oh man, but this could be true. I don't care how crazy it is, it makes sense. It's Gnosticism, through and through. It's what it is. It's this secret, hidden knowledge trying to make sense of these things. Gnosticism is not a good thing. It has a very skewed view of God and his role in everything. And if you think that the physical and material is bad, then what are you going to think about God becoming man and stepping into the physical world? We don't realize it, but and I'm not saying that we have that view, but that is what Gnosticism is. But what does this sound like? Your physical isn't necessarily good or true. Instead, look deep inside yourself. There's an inner truth. There are feelings there, and those feelings are the most true thing that there is. And if those feelings deep inside of you, if those contradict with the physical, then the physical is wrong and your feelings are right. Doesn't this sound like a ton of the conversation surrounding gender identity today? And we have let this kind of run completely wild and unchecked in different ways. That whatever you feel deep inside of you is the greatest truth. You know, that if I want to know who I actually am, the place I should go for that answer is me. And maybe you're like, well, I don't think I'm that bad of a person. You know, Jeremiah 17:9 says, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. And you're like, I don't think I'm that wicked. I don't think that my heart is that bad. Like, I think I'm a pretty good person. Okay, I want to read this whole kind of chunk of verses around that verse in Jeremiah for the context. Because it's not just about our heart. It's about where is it connected? Where are we finding truth? So it says, this is what the Lord says. Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans, who rely on human strength and turn their hearts away from the Lord. They are like stunted shrubs in the desert with no hope for the future. They will live in the barren wilderness, in an uninhabited, salty land. But blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruit. The human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? So where are you putting your trust? Is your trust being put in yourself? Is it being put in other humans? Where is truth coming from in your life? And you might be like, man, that's really harsh. But, and maybe you're even like, that's kind of an Old Testament prophet. They're always kind of harsh. Jesus says the same thing, that when we're left to our own devices, when we aren't set on God and we aren't being renewed by the Spirit, he says what comes out of us is evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. The Apostle Paul says basically the exact same thing in another list. When you let your sinful desires make your decisions. So what does all this mean? Okay, the first thing this means is this. This is a really, really messy situation. This is a messy topic in our world. And I will go as far as saying this is not as black and white as what a lot of people want this to be. All right? Especially a lot of Christians, we want this to be black and white. We want to just say, here's how it is, here's the truth, and that's what it is. God made you man and woman, and that's all there is. And we want it to be black and white. And I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not as black and white as what we want it to be. We live in a fallen world because of sin, and this world is not exactly the way that God intended it. Things happen in ways that God didn't desire. His will doesn't always seem to happen. That's why Jesus says, hey, can you pray, Father, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven? Because it doesn't always happen. And so I want to demonstrate why this isn't as black and white as what we think with a couple of questions. Okay, so the first one is this. Are people born in a way where things aren't the way that God intended it? Yes. We know this. We have sickness, we have disease, we have death, we have all sorts of other things. None of us in this room match up perfectly with God's design for humanity. Every single person in this room, you, your mind, your body, is impacted by being in a sinful world. We fall short. We are broken. Some of you guys are like, I feel that every single day. And every day I get older, I'm feeling it more and more. Right? Like every time you hit one of those numbers, 30, 40, 50, just another thing breaks. We live in a broken world. Does this happen physically with gender? Yes. Absolutely it does. The easiest example to look to is the Olympics. They've been dealing with gender testing and things since the 1930s. There have been instances where someone goes to the world stage to represent their country. And they might come from a smaller region, a smaller town, and maybe they're the fastest person, they're the best, and they've lived their entire life as a woman. Externally, they have all the markers of a woman, and then they go to the Olympics and they end up getting tested, and in front of the entire world on that stage, they find out that their chromosomes are not XX but XY. This happens. Can you imagine the embarrassment for somebody where they're just like, I thought I was a woman. We're not always talking about, with Olympic athletes, people that are like part of a professional circuit and they've been figuring this out and all these different things. And this isn't happening with like super progressive countries that are trying to send somebody who's going to, make a political statement. Okay, like if you go and kind of look through this, some of the more recent ones, India, Kenya, South Africa, Namibia. Okay, these are countries where like, if this was found out on the world stage and you tried to go back to where you're from, there's going to be issues. You're going to face a ton of all sorts of things. Or maybe they just find out that the amount of testosterone that their body produces is far higher than the average woman. Many of these are not situations of someone having a gender reassignment surgery, trying to compete, on the opposite thing, like a lot of stuff that I think we think of when we think of athletics. People are sometimes born with situations around gender that aren't always super clear cut, right? Like when it comes to gender, like we often want to think like, no, it's really simple. No, you have external genitalia, you have internal chromosomes, you have hormones. All these things kind of play into this a little bit. And quite honestly, those three are not always in alignment with each other. they aren't always in perfect sync. So the first question was, does our fallen, broken, sinful world sometimes cause issues with our bodies that aren't the original design? And the answer is yes. But the second question, does God make mistakes when creating somebody? No. And those two answers are really hard to hold together. That God did not make a mistake and think that you need to try and address this, fix this, change this, anything like that. And it may seem like, man, how do you even have both of those things together? In one of the books I was kind of reading as I was preparing for this, it was not a Christian book. It was just from more of like a scientific study approach. And it had one of the sections was actually titled this, Fixing Nature's Mistake. And as I read that, I'm just sitting there looking at this through the lens of God, just being like, man, that's missing it. As medical advances have happened, we've had to process the idea of when does medical intervention happen? When should it happen? And I'm talking about like in everything. Within the deaf community, maybe you knew this, cochlear implants are actually really controversial. Took ASL in college. We spent a lot of time with like deaf community and just learning about deaf community. Cochlear implants, that helps you hear. You'll see like a little hearing aid on the outside. Something's been implanted inside. Allows someone to hear. Really controversial within the deaf community. Because they don't see this as something to be fixed, as something to be healed, as something to get rid of. They are proud of their community that they have, and so that's just kind of like another example of like, listen, like when does medical step in? Like this is a hard, messy conversation. The problem is that when we have this conversation around gender, it seems that there's two different things or categories happening in our world. And depending on what political side someone lands on, they often want to ignore one of these categories and put everything in the other category. Okay? And so either this is all a medical issue, this is wrong, it needs to be addressed. If someone's feeling this, by all means, everything needs to be done in our power to correct that mistake. Every situation is that. Or the other side says, nope, there is never that. This is just people it's all just their feelings. It's something that shouldn't be addressed, and it's not present, it's not there. Nobody should be doing anything. And that's like the two camps. It is important to at least understand that there is some of both going on. There are real gender issues that some people face. And there are also some that are way too quick to label everything as that, especially surrounding things with minors and kids, right? Like we know the human brain does not fully develop until 25. Our world is quick to jump into things though. As we saw with the Cass review in England, without like proper research, we just jump into things. Some medical professionals were saying they felt pressured to always affirm someone's feelings or a family's wishes. That's not good. So how do we approach this? Not like how should our world approach this? I got no answers there. How should we approach this? To be honest, I still don't have a lot of answers. But I don't think we just start redefining truth in our own way, that we get to pick everything ourselves. And we're going to go more in that direction next week. But practically beyond that, I don't have a ton of great answers. And so what I want to do is this. I want to point you to some resources. There's a man named Mark Yarhouse. All right, I'm sure there's other people that have good resources, but this is the one I want to put in front of you. He's a clinical psychologist, which means he has his doctorate, he's practicing. All right, he teaches at Wheaton College, and on top of his doctorate, he has a master's in theological studies. He has written over 100 peer-reviewed articles. That matters. Okay, within the medical world, if you're going to write something, it needs to be peer-reviewed. That means that other people who don't think the way you do, have the same values you do, look at this, read through it, and say, wow, your research is good, your conclusions, like all of this. He has over 100 peer-reviewed articles. He's got over 20 books, and here's a few of the more recent books. And I know, like, I want to put resources in front of people, and I will tell you this, he is going to challenge you. He challenged the way that I kind of think in some of these things. Okay, he talks through the ideas of using someone's preferred pronouns or a different name, things like that, and some that's going to challenge you. I think it's good. But he's got one, the most recent one. It's talking to kids about gender identity, a roadmap for Christian compassion, civility, and conviction. I bought this book this week. It's on its way, and I'm reading this one. I heard him talk about it. He did an interview with a guy named Ed Stetzer. He's like a well-known pastor. And they really kind of went back and forth and he challenged him on a lot of different things. But I love listening to his thoughts, and especially that tagline, compassion, civility, and conviction. Many Christians have a conviction surrounding their beliefs in this area. Many people in our world think they have all the beliefs figured out. They have a conviction about it. That's okay. But he says many of us need to grow in our compassion, which in turn will help our civility, the way that we interact with people. And you don't let go of your conviction. It's not that you drop conviction in order to pick up compassion and civility. You hold all three of those together. It's like what Paul says in Ephesians, that we speak truth in love. We are so bad at that. Like, that's such a hard thing, but so important. So important for us. All right, let's do this. Worship team, would you guys come? Why don't we stand as we can just kind of move to close? As the worship team's coming, I have one last way I want to frame this for us this morning. Paul says this in his letter to the church in Corinth, and it's key for us. Okay, and here's why this is key. Because today, when we approach culture, I think oftentimes people think that there's two options. You either become a culture warrior, right? Like a warrior, like not worry. Sorry, that's a hard word to say and differentiate. Like you're like fighting culture, okay, you're a culture warrior, or you capitulate to culture. It's either, no, we're fighting tooth and nail, and we're going to yell at you, and we're going to scream truth at you, and da-da-da-da, or this side's just like, oh, okay, yeah, like I don't want to hurt anybody, don't want to offend anybody, all right, yep, sounds good. And we think those are the only two options you can go with, and Mark Yarhouse points to this passage, and I love his approach here. So here's what we're reading. It says, Christ's love controls us. Since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we all have died to our old life. He died for everyone so that those who receive his new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ who died and was raised for them. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. I think we all agree with that. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. Okay, being an ambassador is different than being a warrior, and it's different than capitulating to culture. An ambassador, think about this, it's like a delegate that is going somewhere else and saying, I'm not part of you, you're not part of me, but let's have a conversation. And they're in it for the long haul. Ambassadors are tactful. They are moving things forward. They are getting closer to the goal. They meet people where they are, though. They don't push people away just to prove that they're right. They're willing to meet them where they are. Listen, we do this in every other area as Christians. Think about it. We meet people in our world. They don't know Jesus the way that we know Jesus, and we don't expect them to act the way that we act, talk the way that we talk, have the values that we have, and we're okay with where they're at, and we'll walk slowly with them. But then we start talking about gender, we start talking about sexual orientation, and nope, the walls go up, and if you're not where I am, we're not having a conversation. I'm not willing to be an ambassador. I'm not willing to meet you where you are and walk with you. And this is what I think is incredibly challenging for us. We hold our convictions, but we do it with compassion and civility. The world is rushing forward in this area, and I believe that they need a life ring. I believe that they're making mistakes in the way that this is being gone about. But they are not going to listen to another angry Christian who just wants to yell at them. This is messy, and I wish I had better answers. But we have to be willing to step into messiness at times because that's where people are at. We're going to close with a song. Prayer team's going to be down front and in back. If you need prayer for anything in your life, or in your family's life, or in your neighbor's life, or in your friend's life, I want to encourage you, go to one of the prayer team members. So I'm going to close, and we'll close with one song. After that, go take pictures with mom, get to your Mother's Day lunch. But let's not run out of here without allowing God to just kind of like challenge us right now in this moment too. Jesus, we thank you. Lord, that your word does point us in the right directions. I think sometimes we wish that it was just so easily spelled out. But we know that we need to lean into you. We need to trust you more. We need to step into you, and that there is truth here. There is direction for every situation that we're going to encounter. But God, most often, we need to readjust, reassess where we're at in things so that we can be more like you, that we can represent you better. We can be an ambassador of Christ. And so God, help us as we walk through this. God, I pray over people that are dealing with this right now. Families that are dealing with this right now. God, bring peace, bring love, bring compassion. Doesn't mean that we get rid of our convictions. But God, that we'd be able to walk with people. We'd be able to show the love that we have for them as we do this. And as we walk them closer and closer to you. Holy Spirit, we want you to do what only you can do. We can't transform anybody. You can. Jesus, we ask this in your name. Amen.